let's talk about one important difference between undefined versus null. So both looks almost similar, which is representing any absence of the data or maybe the empty data in certain cases. But in background, there are differences between these two. Let's try to identify those differences and in which situation you should use undefined and in which situation you should use null. Very first thing, undefined represent the absence of the data or the absence of the input, and the null represents there is presence of the data but the data given is empty. Let's understand the terminologies very clearly. With undefined, I'm saying data is not given, there is nothing to give any data. And with null, we have given the data but we have given an empty data, we don't want to give any data into that. Let's try to understand with few examples to understand this in more. So firstly, we'll try to understand what are the data types for undefined and the null. So the type of undefined and the type of null. So let's see a console output for the same. So the first one is saying undefined and second one is saying object. It means with this, we should understand when I'm saying type of undefined is undefined. It means undefined is a primitive data type, we can say. It's a primitive data type. And when for the null, I'm checking the type of its type, I'm getting object. It means null is equivalent to an object. Inside this object, there is nothing. That's the reason it's null. But null in background, it's an object. It's not an empty thing. And undefined is a primitive data type. Let's try to understand how exactly both behave in terms of Boolean values. What happens for if else statement when I'm using undefined and what happens when I'm using the null? For example, if undefined, and here I'm just saying hi. So when I'm writing undefined here directly, so this undefined will be considered true or the false. That's a question. If it is getting considered as true, we'll get high. If this is getting considered as false, then we'll not get the high statement. Let's see. No, we are not getting. It means this undefined is equivalent to a false statement in terms of Boolean. Let's try about the null as well. Yes. So null is also equivalent to a Boolean value false. And if you want to print the Boolean values of any particular literal, what you can do, you can just use a double knot undefined. So this double knot will give you the Boolean value for this particular literal. Let's try to do for this null as well. So both will give the false. Yes, we are getting the false in these two cases. Let's understand one very interesting behavior for the undefined and the null when it comes in mathematical calculation. So let's say, for example, I'm doing a calculation, for example, 1 plus 1. And here I'm giving n equals to, for example, 1. And here I'm mentioning 1 plus n here. So of course, we'll get the output 2. That's a usual scenario. But let's understand here. Let me just comment out the previous thing to make it simple. Here I'm giving you the undefined. So what will happen in this case? So this is 1 plus undefined. So how the JavaScript should think about it? I'll just take a pause here so that you can think the output for the same. Yes. So what could be the output for this is not a number, because when undefined is coming over here in place of n and 1 plus undefined is happening, so undefined will get converted to a not a number. And not a number plus 1 is also equals to a not a number. So it is equivalent to the statement we are writing here. So undefined will be converted to a not a number here when we are adding it inside any expression. Let's see what happens when we do for the same for the null value. Let me just copy paste this syntax. This time I want to give a null here. Now see, now we are surprisingly getting 1. So what we understood with this, when we are writing any null here and using the variable which is holding a null value inside any expression, so JavaScript by default convert null into 0. So instead of this null inside variable n here, it will consider it as 0. And that's the reason you are getting 1 plus 0 equals to 1 in our case. So in mathematical expression, the undefined is equivalent to a not a number and the null is equivalent to a 0. Of course, it's a bit risky operation to do this, but this is how the JavaScript works in background. Let's try to understand the undefined and null with some more small example here. For example, I'm writing a function here, for example, to display some data. And here I'm giving one parameter called p and display p here. Okay. So I can call this display function by giving some value and it will work correctly. Okay, this is a normal scenario, but let's say, for example, this data I'm giving from any variable, for example, a equals to high. And here, by mistakenly, I forgot to give the input value. By mistakenly, I forgot to give the parameter for my function display. So what will happen now, even if I'm not giving it a parameter, as per the JavaScript default behavior, it will call the function because it doesn't matter number of parameters you are passing and number of parameters your function is having. This is how the JavaScript works due to the arguments object it is having to store the arguments values. In this case, what will be the value of this p? That is interesting to see. So let's see what happens. So we are getting undefined. So with this, what we should understand, we are not passing the value. So in that case, this p is undefined. It means the undefined is representing the absence of the input you have given. And this is what initially we have discussed. So undefined is an absence of the input maybe or absence of the value we can say. Let's say one more. If I'm giving the a parameter here, but I don't want to display anything. I want to intentionally give a null value. It means you are compulsorily giving some value, some object, some value, some variable, and inside that you are mentioning null. So we are giving a value and we are intentionally giving a value equal to empty. That is what the null represent. This is a small difference between the undefined and the null we can say. So let's see, it's a null in this case. And if we want to write a bit more about it, for example, I can mention type of p is undefined. I can say here, for example, developer forgot to give input. And if the type of p is equals to null, can I write this like this equals to null? Is it correct? No, because the type of p is an object that we have seen here itself. So we cannot write it like that. Let's make it more simple in this way. And here, what I'll mention, the developer intentionally given. So you can see the difference. For example, if I'm not giving any parameter here, let's see what it displays. It says developer forgot to give input. That's what the undefined means. And if I'm giving the a intentionally, which is holding a null value, so in that case, it will say us developer intentionally given null value. Developer is giving a value and mentioning that I don't want to do anything with that value. So here is a small difference between undefined and the null. So hope you understand what's the difference between undefined and the null, what is the data types for both undefined and the null, and how exactly it behaves when we are putting it into expression. So this is all about undefined and the null in JavaScript.